What happens when one of comedy's most controversial voices clashes with morning television's brightest star in a battle that spirals completely out of control? In just 44 seconds, a simple question turns into an absolute disaster that ends with security being called and a furious walk-off that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this unbelievable meltdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that make careers explode in real time. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Last night's episode of Good Morning Britain started like any other morning show, with Kate Garraway sitting across from Ricky Gervais, ready to discuss his latest comedy special. The morning sunlight streamed through the studio windows, casting everything in that perfect television glow that makes guests look their best. Production assistants scurried around, making final adjustments to the lighting, ensuring every camera angle captured the scene perfectly. Kate's makeup artist gave her one last touch-up, while Ricky sat casually in the guest chair, scrolling through his phone with that trademark smirk playing on his lips. The countdown began. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. The red light on camera one blinked to life, and Kate's professional smile bloomed across her face like she'd flipped a switch. She welcomed viewers back from the commercial break with that warm, friendly energy she's known for, her voice smooth and inviting. Ricky looked up from his phone, slipping it into his pocket, as Kate introduced him to the audience. She ran through his credentials, his awards, his Netflix specials, building him up the way good hosts do for their guests. Ricky leaned back in his chair, looking completely at ease in that way celebrities do when they've done 1,000 interviews before. He thanked Kate for having him, cracking a quick joke about the early morning start time that made her laugh genuinely. The banter felt natural, flowing easily between them. Kate asked him about his journey to the studio, and he told a funny story about his driver getting lost despite having GPS. The studio audience chuckled along. Everything seemed perfectly normal, just another celebrity interview on a Tuesday morning. The energy was light, friendly, exactly what morning television audiences expect. Nobody watching at home could have predicted what was about to unfold. Kate transitioned smoothly into asking about his new comedy special, asking what inspired the material and what audiences could expect. Ricky's eyes lit up as he launched into an explanation about observational comedy and finding humor in everyday situations. He talked about the creative process, the hours of writing and rewriting, the importance of timing and delivery. Kate nodded along, asking follow-up questions that showed she'd done her homework. For those first several minutes, it looked like this would be a perfectly pleasant interview, the type that ends with mutual respect and handshakes. But then Kate's expression shifted slightly, her smile taking on a more serious quality. She prefaced her next question carefully, saying that while his comedy was brilliant, there had been some conversations online about certain jokes in the new special. Her tone was still friendly, still professional, but there was a deliberate quality to her words now. She mentioned that some viewers had reached out to the show expressing concerns about specific material. Ricky's body language changed instantly. His relaxed posture stiffened. His smile became fixed rather than genuine. You could see his jaw tighten just slightly. Kate continued, explaining that several parent groups and community organizations had issued statements about jokes they felt crossed lines, particularly material involving marginalized communities. She was careful with her phrasing, acknowledging that comedy is subjective, while also pointing out that these weren't just random trolls on social media. These were organized groups representing thousands of people. Ricky's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. He'd heard this kind of criticism before, and you could tell he was already preparing his defense before Kate even finished her question. When she finally asked him directly how he responds to criticism, that his comedy punches down rather than up, Ricky let out a long breath through his nose. He sat forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees, and launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed response. He said that comedy has always pushed boundaries, that every great comedian in history has made people uncomfortable. He referenced Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, Richard Pryor, citing them as examples of comics who were controversial in their time but are now considered legends. His voice carried conviction, the passion of someone who truly believes in what he's saying. Kate listened patiently, waiting for him to finish before jumping in. She acknowledged his points about comedic history, but pushed back by saying that those comedians he mentioned were often punching up at power structures, at government, at inequality. She asked whether his jokes about certain groups could really be compared to that tradition, or whether they were something different. Her question was pointed but delivered without malice, the kind of challenge a good journalist offers to make an interview more interesting. But Ricky didn't take it that way. His face flushed slightly. Ricky's response came quickly, defensively. He said that the entire concept of punching up versus punching down was ridiculous, that it assumes some people are too weak or fragile to handle jokes. He argued that treating any group as off-limits, because they're supposedly vulnerable, is actually more insulting than making jokes about them. It's patronizing, he said, to decide that certain people can't take a joke while others can. His voice got louder with each point, his gestures becoming more emphatic. He was fully engaged in defending his position now, the pleasant chat completely abandoned. He added that comedy has survived for thousands of years by refusing to bow to pressure from people who want to control what others find funny. Kate tried to interject, to clarify that she wasn't suggesting any group was too fragile, but Ricky kept talking over her. He was on a roll, making his case with the same energy he brings to his stand-up performances. He talked about how offense is subjective, how different people find different things offensive, and you can't possibly create comedy that pleases everyone. He said that trying to make comedy that never offends anyone results in boring, sanitized garbage that isn't funny to anybody. He referenced canceled comedians, banned material, networks pulling episodes. His arguments were articulate and passionate, delivered with the confidence of someone who has thought deeply about these issues and believes absolutely in his own righteousness. But Kate wasn't backing down either. When Ricky finally paused to take a breath, she jumped in firmly. She said that while she understood his perspective, there was a difference between pushing boundaries and being gratuitously cruel. She pointed out that several advocacy groups had explained in detail how specific jokes in his special reinforced harmful stereotypes that have real-world consequences for vulnerable people. She mentioned parents who had written to the show, teachers who dealt with increased bullying after certain jokes went viral, community leaders who saw the impact firsthand. Her voice remained calm and measured, but there was steel underneath her professional tone. She wasn't attacking him, but she wasn't letting him off the hook either. Ricky's frustration was becoming more visible now. He shook his head, letting out an exasperated laugh that had no humor in it. He said that this was exactly the problem with modern discourse, that everyone wants to be offended on someone else's behalf. He argued that comedy needs to be judged by intent, and his intent is never to cause real harm. It's to make people laugh, to make them think, to challenge assumptions. He said that people who are looking for reasons to be offended will always find them, no matter how carefully a comedian words their material. Kate's eyebrows raised slightly. She pointed out that intent doesn't negate impact, a phrase that clearly irritated Ricky even more. She said that many people who create harm don't intend to, but that doesn't mean the harm isn't real. She spoke about how language shapes culture, how jokes can normalize attitudes that lead to discrimination and prejudice. It was a thoughtful argument, delivered with the kind of intelligence that made it clear Kate had considered these issues carefully. But to Ricky, it sounded like the same censorious talking points he'd heard a million times from critics he didn't respect. Ricky's response was sharp and cutting. He said that Kate was conflating comedy with actual prejudice, which was absurd. He said that making a joke about something isn't the same as believing it or promoting it. He asked her if she thought Jonathan Swift wanted people to actually eat babies when he wrote his famous satire. The reference was pointed, designed to make Kate look unsophisticated if she didn't understand the comparison. It was the first, genuinely condescending moment of the interview, and you could see Kate register it. Her expression hardened slightly. Kate responded that she understood satire perfectly well, thank you very much, but that Swift was clearly satirizing the wealthy and their callousness toward the poor. She asked what exactly Ricky's jokes were satirizing. Or were they just jokes at the expense of people who already face discrimination in their daily lives? Her tone had an edge to it now, the professional warmth cooling into something more confrontational. The dynamic in the studio had shifted. This wasn't a friendly interview anymore. It was becoming a debate, and not a particularly pleasant one. Ricky sat back in his chair, throwing his hands up in a gesture of exasperation. He said that he didn't need to explain or justify his comedy to anyone, that the millions of people who watch his specials and laugh clearly get it, even if Kate and her focus groups don't. It was dismissive, insulting even. He was essentially saying that Kate wasn't sophisticated enough to understand his work. The other hosts sitting at the desk exchanged glances. The studio audience had gone completely silent, sensing the tension building. Kate's professional mask slipped for just a moment, her eyes flashing with anger before she composed herself. She said that dismissing legitimate criticism as people not getting the joke was intellectually lazy. She told Ricky that she'd watched his special, that she'd read the analysis from various groups, and that she understood his comedy perfectly well. She simply disagreed with his approach. Her words were clipped now, each one delivered with precision. The pleasantries were gone. They were in the middle of a real argument now. Ricky leaned forward again, pointing his finger at Kate. He said that this was the problem with mainstream media, that they invite comedians on and then ambush them with moral lectures about what's acceptable to joke about. He said he'd been doing comedy for decades, that he'd won every major award, and that he didn't need a morning show host who interviews soap actors to tell him what comedy should be. The insult hung in the air, shocking in its directness. Several crew members gasped audibly. Kate's face went pale, then flushed deep red. There was a moment of absolute silence in the studio. Kate stared at Ricky, apparently struggling to process what he'd just said. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. She said that she'd shown him respect by having him on the show, by watching his material, by engaging seriously with his work. And his response was to insult her and dismiss her as just a morning show host. She asked if he treated everyone who disagreed with him with such contempt, or if that was special treatment reserved for women in media. Ricky's eyes widened at the accusation. He immediately denied that gender had anything to do with it, saying that he'd had the same arguments with male journalists and critics. He said Kate was trying to make this about sexism, when it was really about free speech and artistic freedom. His voice was rising now, the anger fully present and undisguised. He accused her of using identity politics to shut down legitimate debate about comedy and censorship. It was a familiar deflection, but delivered with enough venom to make it cut deep. Kate wasn't having it. She raised her voice to match his volume, something viewers almost never see her do. She told Ricky that calling someone out for being disrespectful wasn't identity politics, it was basic human decency. She said that he'd come on the show with an attitude of superiority, refusing to seriously engage with any criticism of his work. She pointed out that she'd asked him reasonable questions that lots of people wanted answered, and, instead of responding thoughtfully, he'd chosen to attack and dismiss her. Her finger was pointing at him now, her whole body language aggressive in a way that shocked everyone watching. She said that great comedians throughout history knew how to handle criticism with grace, but apparently that was a skill he hadn't learned despite all those awards he liked to mention. Ricky shot back immediately, saying that Kate had come into this interview with an agenda, clearly planning to attack him from the start. He said the questions weren't in good faith, that she was trying to make him look bad rather than have an actual conversation. He accused her of grandstanding for the cameras, of using him to score points with viewers who were already predisposed to dislike him. His face was red now, his voice echoing through the studio. Any pretense of civility had been completely abandoned. This was an all-out confrontation. He said that he'd done hundreds of interviews, and he could smell a setup from a mile away. He accused her of being another media personality, more interested in virtue signaling than actually understanding comedy or free expression. Kate stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sudden movement startled everyone. She told Ricky that if he was going to sit there and insult her, question her integrity, and dismiss everything she said, then this interview was over. Her voice shook slightly, but whether from anger or adrenaline was impossible to tell. She gestured toward the studio door, her meaning crystal clear. "Get out." The studio fell into shocked silence. Nobody had expected things to escalate this far. Nobody had expected Kate to actually kick him off the show. Her co-host sat frozen, unsure if they should intervene. The camera operators kept filming, instinctively knowing this was television gold. Ricky stared at her in disbelief. For a moment, he seemed genuinely stunned, like he couldn't process what was happening. Then his expression shifted to one of bitter amusement. He let out a harsh laugh and said that of course she was ending the interview, because that's what happens when you can't win an argument. You just shut it down. He said this was censorship in action, that she was proving his entire point about how the media handles opinions they don't like. His words were sharp and mocking, designed to hurt. He wanted her to know that he thought she was weak, that she couldn't handle real debate, that she was just another mainstream media puppet afraid of controversial voices. Kate's hands were trembling now, but her voice was steady. She told him this had nothing to do with winning or losing an argument. It had everything to do with him being incredibly disrespectful on her show. She said that she'd invited him as a guest, and he'd repaid that hospitality by insulting her, dismissing her questions, and acting like he was too important to be challenged on anything. She told him that kind of behavior wasn't welcome on Good Morning Britain, and she wanted him to leave immediately. Her eyes blazed with fury. Ricky ripped off his microphone in one violent motion, the wire snapping free from his shirt. The sound tech flinched, clearly worried about the equipment. Ricky didn't care. He stood up, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair, with enough force to nearly knock the chair over. He muttered something under his breath about this being exactly what's wrong with television these days, about how nobody can handle honest conversation anymore. His movements were jerky and aggressive as he gathered his belongings, his phone clattering onto the desk as he fumbled to pick it up. Kate remained standing by her chair, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching Ricky with an expression that mixed anger and disappointment. The other hosts had frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Studio crew members hovered at the edges of the set, some with phones out, clearly recording this unprecedented moment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the disaster. In all the years Good Morning Britain had been on the air, nothing quite like this had ever happened. As Ricky shouldered his jacket on, he turned back to face Kate one more time. He said loudly, making sure everyone in the studio could hear, that she'd just proven everything wrong with mainstream media. That they invite people on to have conversations, but really they just want to lecture and moralize and shut down anyone who doesn't think the right way. He said that real audiences, his audiences, would see through this bullshit. They'd know who was really in the wrong here. His voice dripped with contempt and self-righteousness. Kate didn't respond verbally. She just stood there, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on Ricky with an intensity that could have burned holes through him. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of another argument, wasn't going to let him bait her into saying something she'd regret. Her silence was somehow more powerful than any retort could have been. It spoke volumes about her fury and her determination to maintain whatever dignity she could in this awful situation. Security personnel appeared at the studio doors, having clearly been summoned during the confrontation. They stood there waiting, not moving to physically escort Ricky out, but making their presence known. Their appearance seemed to enrage Ricky even further. He shouted something about needing security to remove him, asking if Kate was afraid he was going to do something violent. It was a ridiculous accusation, and everyone knew it, but he threw it out anyway as one final insult. Ricky stormed toward the exit, his footsteps loud in the heavy silence. He walked past the security guards without looking at them, his face still flushed with anger. As he reached the door, he stopped and turned back one last time. He looked directly into the camera and said that this was what censorship looks like in real time, that this was how the establishment treats anyone who refuses to bow to their rules about what you're allowed to say and think. Then he pushed through the door with enough force that it slammed against the wall. The bang echoed through the studio. The door swung shut behind him, and for a long moment nobody moved. The studio was frozen in shock. Kate slowly uncrossed her arms and sat back down in her chair, her movements careful and deliberate. She took a deep breath, visibly trying to compose herself. Her hands were still shaking as she straightened the papers on the desk in front of her. She ran her fingers through her hair, a gesture that betrayed how rattled she really was, despite her attempt to look calm. Her co-hosts finally sprang into action, reaching over to check if she was okay. She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. She took a deep breath, then looked at the cameras. The professional mask was sliding back into place. She apologized to viewers for what they'd witnessed, saying the interview had taken an unexpected turn. She said Good Morning Britain welcomes diverse viewpoints but also maintains standards of respect and civil discourse. The other presenters jumped in to support her, trying to lighten the mood. But the atmosphere remained heavy. Kate glanced toward the door one more time, a complicated expression on her face. She'd never kicked a guest off before. It was unprecedented. And while she seemed confident she'd made the right call, you could tell she was shaken. Kate pulled herself together. Transitioning to the next segment, her voice wasn't quite as warm as usual, but she was powering through. The shadow of the confrontation hung over everything. This would be the clip everyone talked about, the moment that defined this episode. As the show moved toward its conclusion, Kate made another brief statement about the incident. She thanked viewers for their support, reiterating that the show remained committed to free speech, but never at the expense of basic decency. The credits rolled, and Kate remained at the desk, chatting with her co-hosts. Staff members began dismantling equipment. Kate finally stood, accepting hugs from crew members. She gathered her papers slowly, the confrontation having drained her. She walked toward her dressing room with her producer and assistant, their heads bent together in serious conversation. The door closed, providing privacy after the public battle. Outside the building, Ricky was long gone, having left immediately after his dramatic exit. 44 seconds was all it took to transform from pleasant banter to explosive confrontation to security called chaos. The building continued buzzing with residual energy from what had happened. Staff members clustered in hallways and break rooms, replaying the confrontation blow by blow. Everyone had their own opinion about who was in the right, who crossed the line first, whether Kate should have ended the interview or whether she overreacted. But everyone agreed on one thing. They'd just witnessed something unprecedented, something that would be talked about, debated, and analyzed for weeks to come. The clip was already being uploaded by viewers, shared across every social media platform, dissected by commentators and fans alike. By the time Kate emerged from her dressing room an hour later, changed into casual clothes and makeup removed, the clip was already everywhere online. Millions of views, thousands of comments, trending on every platform. The confrontation had taken on a life of its own, spreading across the internet at lightning speed. Good Morning Britain's social media team was probably fielding inquiries from every news outlet in the country. Producers were likely in emergency meetings discussing damage control or celebrating the ratings boost, depending on their perspective. Kate walked to her car in the parking structure, her assistant carrying her bags. She looked tired, drained in a way that went beyond just physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion, the kind that comes from conflict and confrontation. She'd handled it as well as anyone could, but that didn't make it any less difficult. 44 seconds had changed everything about her morning. In less than a minute, a professional interview had transformed into the most explosive confrontation Good Morning Britain had ever broadcast. The dramatic confrontation on Good Morning Britain had ended exactly as these things always seem to end, with someone walking out, a door slamming, and everyone left behind, trying to figure out what the hell just happened.